Hello. In this video, we're going to talk about routing in Go. So, if you come from a Node.js background, like I do, would normally use an Express app. I know there are other uh, libraries there for routing and for serving, make an HTTP server, or you can use the default one from Node, as you can do with Go. But normally you're going to use Express. In Go, the standard library already has a lot of ways to deal with handling and to deal with making a server, right? So to make a server, it's fairly simple. You have this convenient function here, which is function listen and serve, and you give the address. If you're in localhost, you're going to give a port and a handler, right? And a handler, it's any structure that implements the handler interface, meaning that it's any structure that has a method called serve HTTP, which accepts the response router and a pointer to a request. So this is the signature of the function, right? So you can see here we have listen and serve. This is the port. This is by the way, it's not Magic Soup. This is another project I have, but I'm using the default multiplexer. I'm going to explain what it is. So you can see I'm listen and serve here. I'm getting the port from an environment variable, and it accepts a multiplexer, right? And in this case, I'm passing nil, so it uses the default multiplexer from Go. Now, what is a multiplexer? Well, a multiplexer is something that maps URL requests to a certain pattern, and it calls a callback function for that. All right. So if we go here to our Magic Soup, I'm using Julian Schmidt's router, but I'm going to explain it later. So a multiplexer, what it does, it matches a URL to a certain pattern, right? And it calls essentially a callback function, which mine are written here, right? So Go has a default multiplexer, right? So if you don't pass anyone here, in Magic Soup, in the other project I'm passing Julian Schmidt's router, but you can also pass on one that's very famous is the Gorilla Mux. You can go to this website and you're going to find it's very rich, but for the sake of this little project of Magic Soup, I'm using Julian Schmidt's. But here in this other project I have, you can see that I'm using the Go's default, right? So here you can see I have a handle func method. So I am appending to my mux uh, some patterns. This is API, and this is the callback function, right? And here I have for the root and the callback function, right? So, and this is static files handling. So you can serve HTTP requests easily with only the standard library. You don't need to use any kind of multiplexer, Julian Schmidt's router, or Gorilla Mux, or anyone. You really don't need. But if you can see in Golang's basic multiplexer, you kind of have to do some extra work. You kind of have to parse your requests and see the method. For example, if it's a post request or if it's a GET request, and you have to, in this example here, I have to parse my request and see the params, right? So I have to parse, check for errors, and read the params somewhere. So the good thing about Julian Schmidt's router, it is very, very performant. If you go to his GitHub, and let me see if it's here. Here you're gonna see that he has a whole thing. I'm not gonna find it now, but he has a whole thing dealing with performance. He has a whole lot of benchmarks that he uses, and it's really, really, really. See, you have benchmarks here, and it really speaks for himself. He benchmarks against a lot of other multiplexers. All right, so this is why I'm using it. It's for convenience mostly. So I am used to Express, Node.js Express way of handling things. So this is more familiar. It's more readable. So you can see that here I am instantiating a router, right? And here I am setting to false this handle method not allowed, which means that, for example, I want to have the same pattern, meaning the path to login, with two methods, for example, get and posts. If this was set to true and the default setting is true, it would throw me an error. So I had to set this to false. But anyway, I am instantiating a new router, and I am using these convenient methods of get and post, and it's much more readable. I am setting the pattern and telling what callback function to call whenever this pattern is matched. And here I have several of these callback functions, right? So I have my index handler, I have login handler, login post handler, I have logout, and creating a new soup, and probably deleting a new soup, right? So it's a very good multiplexer. Here I'm doing some, I'm not even sure if this is the right way to do uh, assets and static files, but I'm doing it anyway. And I'm passing it the port 8080. You should not care for this because this is a little middleware I wrote. I'm going to explain later. So basically this is routing. It's oh, and Julian Schmidt's router has another thing. You can see that when you use the default servmux in Golang, your handler function, what you have the response writer and a pointer to requests. It's the same thing as in Node. You have request and response. You have access to those objects, or those structs in any case. So in Julian Schmidt's, he gives us another parameter, which is the params from the URL, right? So you have the response writer, you have a pointer to the request, that you have access to both of them, but you also have this params here, right? And I'm not using in these, but I'm sure I'm using somewhere here. For example, to create a new soup, let's say I'm using this one of the parameters. So essentially, it's helpful to use a router like Julian Schmidt. It gives you a lot of, not a lot, but some convenience. It's not life changer, but it gives you some sort of convenience. And I recommend you checking out also Gorilla Mux, which is very popular. Thank you.